Okay. A one-time advisor to Walter Cronkite, winner of the Angstrom Science Award, one-time advisor to NASA, where he is now held in very high esteem. You will see Richard Hoagland photographs lining the walls, NASA Ames and a Jet Propulsion Lab and places like that where Richard has almost turned into a cult figure for the people there. This is Richard C. Hoagland. Hi, Richard.
You mean to tell me when they say I give a stem-winding speech, it's not a compliment?
A stem, people, man, that's the best yet. It made my whole night. I haven't laughed in days.
Oh,
Look,
that is pretty good.
and while we're on the subject, Sally, who I played that song for in Washington, writes, so before we get on to the more serious stuff, Richard, I want to know about this, too. Let me read you the facts, all right?
Okay.
A friend and I have been waiting for months now for you to have Richard on again. Hello, Richard. So that we could pose the following question. Though Old Navy was an unusual twist by Richard, it was a subject that struck a chord with both of us, only to get more and more strange as time went by. Nothing has been said about it for some time now. However, there have been an incredible rash of strange Old Navy commercials lately featuring the dog Magic, with a J. Is there any new information or news about Old Navy, or is this now one of those subjects that if I told you I'd have to kill you? So, yeah, I want to know, too. There was this time when you came on the air and you talked about these meetings in Old Navy stores across America and sales at $19 and something or another.
19.5.
19.5, of course. And you had people go into the stores with these coat hangers or something, wasn't it?
No, I had them the little model tetrahedrons.
Little model tetrahedrons, which people, I think, made out of coat hangers. That's where I got
Some
that.
did, yes.
Yes, and go in and ask about the meeting at the Old Navy stores. And you know, so I kind of agree with this faxer. What's the latest on Old Navy? The whole thing struck people as really strange and odd and bizarre, but it's like there was something to it.
Well, when they got into the intertelephone system, they found even stranger things, if you remember. And this was all triggered the night of the Phoenix Lights, March 13th of last year, the same night that President Clinton had something happen to him, 2,000 miles away in Florida. And we have seen not only publicly a series of these commercials, but you remember the Indianapolis 500 when Old Navy entered a car, a major...
You know what? I do. I remember seeing the car and
you
seeing
remember the number of the car?
Was it 19?
33.
33.
And do you remember what the driver wore on his helmet?
No, Richard, that I don't.
Giza. We need to do a show where we focus.
Wait a minute here. This may be a case of wag the dog. Now, at this point, Richard, I'm starting to wonder if your thing about Old Navy is feeding them, and they're using it now, and they're just provoking you and everybody else who got into that Old Navy thing, and it's just a great advertising scheme for them.
Well, if that's true, then the checks are late because they're not paying their royalties.
Well, no, and they wouldn't have to. You're putting it right in their laps. Now, I admit that what you just told me about the driver is beyond all reason of coincidence, period.
As Geraldo says, his hallmark for his show is there is no such thing as coincidence.
Well, not this big. So that makes me think it's wag the dog, and Richard is wagging Old Navy, and Old Navy is thankfully wagging back. Now, is it that, or is there really some deep, dark conspiracy within the walls of Old Navy
every time
stores?
we mention this subject, you bring up the topic of dark. Right?
Yes.
Graham Hancock and Robert Ball, our mutual friends,
Yes.
are working on a book next year for release next spring, which is going to be called, I believe the working title is The Benign Conspiracy.
Benign.
And what they're going to do is to track what we have been tracking, which is basically the Masonic tradition of enlightenment, which started in Europe, actually started in Egypt and worked its way through Europe and ultimately wound up with the gestation of the United States of America. As you begin to take apart all the symbols, starting with what's on the dollar bill,
Yes.
both sides. If you take apart the Great Seal, if you take apart the nation's capital, if you look at the shots of CNN with a helicopter poised next to the Washington Monument, which is nothing but an enormous Egyptian obelisk tracing its way back to the ancient kingdoms of Egypt, you begin to understand that somebody had a plan. And every time you say plan, people snicker now, because we live in an age when nobody plans anything. They're planning maybe for the next quarter, maybe for next week. But civilizations, great cultures, are spawned and nourished by people who have great vision and great dreams and great plans. And what made the United States of America what it is, Art, is great planning. We keep, we honor the founding fathers and we honor their vision, and yet we refuse to look at the extraordinary instruments that made what they conceived possible. And some night, not too distant from now, we need to do a show where we lay out the history of this republic, its extraordinarily interesting traditions, and the computerized, demonstrable evidence that someone is continuing those traditions right up until last week. And we can prove it.
Until last week?
Yeah. That's when I stopped looking because I had to prepare for some other things. But in other words,
you're not saying that the whole thing has... Oh, okay.
Not at all. No. I'm looking at tracking what is occurring.
Well, all right. It's going to take a whole show for you to convince me.
Well, I don't want to convince anybody. I want to have the time, Art, to lay out the evidence, and I want to bring on a couple of colleagues who will work very hard, they're behind the scenes, to provide some of this evidence, and we will let the people decide, because that's what science is. It's putting the evidence on the table and letting the body politic come to a decision.